thanks for having me. So we're just gonna go through a case that we got to work up a couple months ago now. So let's just start with the video and then we can get warmed up with Kim's presentation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Teryn. This is Tracy, the poultry technician. We are going to show you guys a case we've been working on, and come on in. Okay, so the case that we have today are broilers that are just not doing very well. Daily mortality is about 0.18%, and the producer would like it at less than 0.1%, and I agree. In the barn, there's some varied uniformity. The producer notes that there may be some wetter feces. Previous cycles have had higher feed conversion rates, and the last cycle was diagnosed with necrotic enteritis that responded quite quickly to pop pen. And the producer says that the last few cycles, the growth just hasn't been there. So he would like to know what's going on in the bird, so maybe we can do something right away. So we're gonna get started. We're gonna look at some live birds and take some blood samples, and then we're gonna open up some birds and see what we find. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to look at the overall bird condition because we have multiple birds from this barn. We'll be comparing body weights and just how the feathering looks and the general bird size. So the first thing we did, we took body weights, and then we're going to start at the head, checking out the eyes. Can open up the mouth and see if we see anything abnormal right now, and we'll cut down further after.
So if it was abnormal, what would you see?
Yeah, so today we'll be looking for oral lesions, but you want to look for anything that's not supposed to be there. And we'll go through that. It's easier once you cut it open.
Of course.
Okay, and then looking at the foot pads, so if they're clean or if there's a bit of dermatitis. And so there's a little bit of dermatitis, so that may mean that it's a bit more wet or slick in the barn. If this bird has any blood or any trauma, checking for any scratches. So then the first thing, and everybody opens birds differently, but the most important thing would be that you open them the same way every time. So we cut the skin between the legs, and then we're going to pop out the hip bones like that. So that's the hip bone. Okay, so that would be called femoral head necrosis, so that hip bone has come off. Then we're going to cut under the breastbone, the keel, and go up along the ribs. And then reflect that breastbone back, like this. Okay, so looking at this here, we have our heart, our liver. You can see a little bit of the gizzard there, or ventriculus, and then the start of the intestines. And the first thing that we notice, and you can see this other bird here, so there's nothing concerning that we're seeing right now. In general, everything looks normal. So then we're going to scoop on our right side of the bird's left, and just reflect that gizzard back and take a look at the intestines. You can see the spleen. This is a normal size, so there's no big infection here that we see yet. And then I'm also taking a look at the lungs up here as well. And if you want to just use your finger, you can pull the lungs off of the rib cage. You can see the bird's kidneys right here. Another thing that we do here is look for erosions in the gizzard. And so there's none in this one. But it's important to look in every bird because that can give you an indication if something's burning through this layer, like mycotoxins or like a disease. And then we look into the proventriculus, which is up here. So this is a true stomach of the bird. And then the last thing we're going to look at is just cutting into the bone. That's normal. So this is called tibial dyschondroplasia. So this is an abnormal growth plate, and it can be caused by many different things. can be genetics, it can be fast growth, it can be unbalanced feed, but it is a cause of lameness. So we'll check the other leg, and not surprisingly, it's in both legs. Then we're going to check bone strength, and that's good. Now, so we're cutting down the left side of the bird's face. And opening this up, we're going to get all of this feed out of the way so we can take a really close look. So this is the top of the mouth. So we're looking for anything abnormal. So that could be blood, that could be white spots, that could be red spots, anything like that. And then we're going to look under the tongue. Same thing. So there's nothing abnormal here. This is the esophagus, or the tube food, or the food tube. So after they eat and it swallows and it goes down. So we're going to run that all the way down. Make sure there's nothing there. And this is the trachea, or the windpipe. So we're going to look at that too. Some drier material. This is a really good image of the crop. So that's normal. Okay. So the way that this intestine works is where it folds on itself, that's the duodenum. And then you get into your small intestine, which is all of this.
It's not so small.
No, it goes on forever. So I always start at the duodenum. So what I'm looking at right now is, are there any areas that are really inflamed or thin-walled or full of fluid, or showing more of those veins, the vasculature, showing maybe there's more inflammation. And in general, these guys look pretty good. So we're going to start cutting into them and looking, and then doing some scrapings.
Okay.
That's the inside of the duodenum, and it looks fairly good. But Tracy's going to do a scraping here. Okay, so we're going to take that scalpel blade and we're going to scratch. So Tracy's moving that excess stuff off the intestine, and then now she's scratching, or kind of like a scraping over the intestine. And we're trying to see if there's any coccidia in that intestine, in that section. So we do 3 sections of the intestines while we're having a look at the entire intestine.
So if you saw something weird in this point, it would be inflamed.
It would be bloody and red. There may actually be blood in here.
In the ceca, or just throughout the intestine?
Okay. And it can be throughout too, but right now in the ceca specifically, I look for signs of ulceration. I look for any ulcers, and then Tracy will also take a scalpel to it. And then the other thing I always like to take a look at and sample is the cecal tonsil, which is like this little knobby bit right there. So I'm going to cut this so you can see what it looks like. So there's a bit of an ulceration there. So we're going to sample that along with all of our other samples.
Okay.
And then we'll talk with the producer about what he would like us to send. Okay, so thank you for coming along for the postmortems today. Based on what we found when we looked through all of the birds, I'm suspicious of these birds not thriving or not doing as well as we would like, potentially due to the presence of mycotoxins in their feed. So mycotoxins are toxic parts or poisonous parts of fungi that are produced by molds that are sometimes found in feed. Broilers typically are more resistant to mycotoxins compared to the other poultry species such as turkeys, broiler breeders, or laying hens, but we obviously have some cases where broilers are affected. Impacts of mycotoxins on birds are going to vary by type of mycotoxin, how much mycotoxin is there, and how long the bird has had access to those mycotoxins. So how long has that bird been eating feed that has the mycotoxins? The other interesting part about mycotoxins that we have to keep in mind is that while there's different types, some increase the amount of the other type of mycotoxins, so they can work together to have a worse effect on the bird. When broilers, broiler breeders, turkeys, or layers ingest mycotoxins, the health of the intestines, which we saw today, and sometimes the other organs like the liver that we saw today, become compromised or become more sensitive. When the intestinal health is compromised, that allows bacteria to go from the intestine into the bloodstream and then can shower the rest of the bird's organ system. And so then we may see abnormalities in the liver, or potentially other organs, but today we saw the liver. Arguably the worst part of mycotoxins is how they compromise the immune system of the bird. And so that means that the bird, whatever kind it is now more likely to get disease. So they may just have more sickness or just be more poor doing. In addition to, sometimes they don't always respond well to vaccines. So if you have layers or you have breeders and you're checking your vaccination titers and they're not as good as they usually are, sometimes that can be due to mycotoxins. What clued me into the potential mycotoxins case today was the decreased gut health. So quite a few of the birds had enteritis, which is inflammation of the intestines. And then with that history of the previous necrotic enteritis in last cycle, this is a conventional producer, and so we typically don't see necrotic enteritis. So my thought right now is the enteritis that we're seeing today maybe progressed further or faster in the previous flock and became necrotic enteritis that then required treatment. The other clue for the mycotoxins is that there was no significant consistent disease in these birds. We didn't have a widespread infection. We didn't have evidence of a virus. We just saw kind of suboptimal intestinal health. We saw some oral lesions, which can indicate mycotoxins, and then we saw an abnormal liver. So today what we're going to do, we're going to send samples to the lab for a full workup, both microscopic and bacteriology. We're also going to send a feed sample as well after speaking with the producer. What we recommended to the producer today was to provide copper sulfate to the birds for 2 to 3 days, and that can sometimes help with gut health. The reason that this is an important case for us to remember is mycotoxins may be present more than we realize, and they can increase that they can increase the cost of production through decreasing performance. So for broilers, maybe they're not growing as well, like we saw the birds today. The uniformity isn't as good, so they're eating more because they're not as efficient, so your feed costs are going up, or just treatment costs. Like the cost of an antibiotic for treating necrotic enteritis isn't cheap. So, and then decreased production too. So if you have laying hens, maybe they're not laying eggs as often, or maybe your undergrades are going up, or maybe hatchability isn't as great for the broiler breeders. So it's something we always have to keep in mind.
Well, that gives us an overview. I think, Kim, you're going to jump in now and talk about your role with this case study.
Sure, I'm ready. Give me a few minutes. I try to share my screen here. Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen now?
No.
Yeah, so, oh, haven't?
Not quite yet. I'm sure it's coming.
Okay.
There, we're on the road now.
Okay. Oh, it's just confused with my two screen here. Let me try again. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Ready? Yeah, so our talk today is around feed efficiency. And I hope that you all enjoy the cooking show prepared by Dr. Teryn. Now you know the next time when the vet asks you to go out for dinner, you know how to answer. In fact, I really enjoy watching all the precision cuts there. I'm not going to repeat all the details here, but the story began when the producer wondered about his on-farm performance and then brought some birds to the clinic. And after the necropsy, the vet think that mycotoxin could play a role. And now the story continues with the nutritionist, and I'm going to share with you my view and a few information today.
Okay, Kim, can you just double check your view? Still not quite seeing your presentation.
Okay. Say share. So let me do it again. So my internet connection is slow. Okay. Share. Okay.
It's getting closer. We're seeing a blue screen now.
Yeah. Okay. I just got a problem. Oh. Okay, back to my screen. Share screen. Okay.
There we go. Success.
So I just mentioned that about the cooking show that Dr. Teryn prepared for us there, and then I'm going to go quickly about like what mycotoxin may do to the bird actually. At the end of the video that Dr. Teryn already mentioned that toxin can create all kinds of damages to performance, and it's really can hurt the performance, and whether it happened in layers or in broilers or in turkey. Here we go. Can you see my pointer? And whether if in layers, then you will get damage with the oviducts and affect the overall performance egg production. Most of the time, we cannot see the internal damage, whether it happened at the liver, at the spleen, or at the gut. But sometimes, whether in this case, the customer think that whether performance can be better or via necropsy or carefully check, then make people think, oh, there's something that we can do better to help with the performance. So in this slide here, I put out a few mycotoxin belongs to the Antennaria mycotoxins and the Fusarium groups here, which we rarely heard or pay attention to. But with the science today, we have more understanding about these mycotoxins and confirm its damage to our livestock performance, especially when the toxin damage the gut cell wall, the liver, the spleen, where all the immunity action happened. Then the damage become more like systemic. So the toxin topic is, I guess, it's more than the people talk about this more than 20 years, and together with toxin biter, and I have no intention to make this topic any older. But if you care about gut health and want to increase your flock performance in general, then hang tight. This presentation is for you. So as a nutritionist, and when I heard about mycotoxins, then I will go back and check things from the ingredient standpoint. In the next few slides, I'm going to share with you how the corn crop looks like last year as an example. Most of our corn coming from the states, and all the states that supply corn, I put it on the y-axis, the x-axis here, and on the y-axis is the toxin in ppb. The orange bar is probably what you have in your bins at the moment. The blue bar is the crop in 2020, so a year before. So on this graph here, show that fumonisin, this is what we look at, were less than, or in most of the case is look much better or the same as the year before. How about Dawn? So we see the same trend with Dawn between 2021 and 2020, whether it's better or it's were the same. Zero and on. This also show the same trend. Of course, if you get your corn from Manitoba or Tabor areas, the story could be slightly different. In general, I got the answer from people around me that for this year or for past year, that toxin is not something a big concern. Okay, what's next? So this slide shows you the procedure to get one toxin tested in the past. The sample got graded and followed the lab procedures, and whether using ELISA or this is the procedure to get like one mycotoxin read or tested. As of today, toxin can be tested and quantified in less than 10 minutes. And with that, when you pay for the sample tested, it can come as a package that you can see up to 6 or 8 toxins at the same time. So that will help to provide more insight. The result here was from our local wheat. The industry acceptance level is around 2 ppm or 2000 ppb or 2 milligram per kilogram. So you can tell that this wheat is good, but the fact is that it has a little bit of everything. Then the pertinent question would be whether my birds will be affected, whether performance will be compromised. Should I use toxin binders all the time, or at which stage of growth should I use toxin binder, or how do I know if the toxin binder worked? Well, a new way to measure, the impact of toxin on the birds here, or if inside the birds. In the past, one could rely heavily on experience or guessing, but today you can utilize the blood test to review how the birds are exposing to the toxins. This is biomarkers have been prepared on a collection card. This card is kind of like, I would say, the same size or bigger a bit compared to your normal credit card. Blood samples from 5 different birds will be placed on the biomarkers here and then sent to the lab. So it's not like blood, but the blood will drawn from the birds and then drop onto these biomarkers card and then sent to the lab, and the result come back within 7 or 10 days. So this is an example. The trial was done in China. The feed and the blood sample were collected at the same time. From the feed test, it was able to detect up to 3 toxins present in the feed. But when people look at the blood, it has the bird they are fighting with more than, like in this case, 7 different toxins. So the biomarkers was designed to recognize up to 16 keys mycotoxin from feed, and in the blood it could recognize up to like 36 mycotoxins. So these information will help to provide more insight what really present in the feed and what actually happened inside the bird, because Dr. Teryn mentioned that maybe some toxins, it was at low level, but when combined together, those toxins, it will create harmful to the internal organs, and then it's spread to the bloodstream, and then when the gut open, all kinds of disease spread out. On this slide here, I want to share with you a tool that help to visualize the growing, the shifting of the gut microflora, combining with the artificial intelligence or AI technology. It will help you to provide more insight. My colleague, Dr. Jean de Oliveira, just unveiled this technology at IPPE last month. This technology, it will help you to answer some pertinent question as a farm manager, as a nutritionist or a veterinarian when you do your chicken growing here. So have you ever asked these questions like, why are the differences between barns when I use the same feed? How can we understand the prevalence of salmonella in the flock? Whether you can change or use a less feed ingredient, and whether that change will affect the gut microflora. So any data that can help to improve the management practice. So this tool can help, and beside that, it will help with benchmarking and routine monitoring, and within research as well. So starting from the farm level, the fecal materials will be collected in a provided tube and then sent away for the lab work. It will take about 10 to 14 days to come back. That's with the easy part that I show with you at the farm level. This is how the model and how it works. And we have been building a large database enough to help us to understand which bacterial group is needed for the growth of the bird, at which stage, which microflora group play a pivotal role, and then the shifting of the microflora or the maturation of the microflora need to be happened. Which ingredient or additives could create the shifting of those bacteria groups. Together with the machine learning and the mathematical built in the model, this will help to have ability to predict the trend. And together, when we have the customer data, this tool, it will help to predict, classify, or point out what need to be changed to get the right microflora group for the best growth or achieve the genetic potential from the breed. This is where the technology have been developed and tested in several regions, started from our global innovation centers, and then the blue dot here, technology application centers. The orange dot that you saw on the screen, that's where we had the customer trials. And from my job and my ambition here, like I really want to put an orange dot on our Canadian landmark here. So any question, if you have demand, feel free to reach out. This is my my last slide here, and let's connect the info together. So mycotoxin could be the theft that suddenly stealing the profit from the producers in this case study. But we need to verify and filter out the other factors. And as a live production nutritionist, and nowadays the job can be assisted with advanced technology, which can help us to understand what happened to the birds when we make the change from the nutrition or management. When we feed, and how it could impact microflora, reflecting in performance index. More importantly, these tools will help to turn insight into informed action. That's all I have, and Dr. Teryn and I will be happy to take questions from the audience. Thank you, and let's talk.
Yeah, it sounds like a very important tool. Teryn, maybe bring us up to date. What happened next in this particular case study then?
Yeah, so in this case study, we tested out the blood test for mycotoxins and we tested the feed for mycotoxins, and both showed that there was not a significant amount of mycotoxins, but enough to, I guess, hold back production. So he then worked with his nutritionist and put in a toxin binder.
And then did that make a difference? Did he find better performance from that?
Yeah, I think so. We are just in the following cycle right now. I've been keeping a close eye on them. They seem to be doing well, probably more uniform than the previous cycles, and no gut health issues yet.
Kim, it sounds like maybe there are a couple of ways to try and figure out what kind of a binder to use, whether it would be a blood test or a feed test. Would there be a benefit to adding a mycotoxin binder at all times, sort of a low level at all times?
It sounds like at the beginning of the talk, and when you heard about toxin binder, it sounds like it's a no-brainer to have toxin binder at all time, right? However, when you look at, the industry standard, when usually, the acceptance level is at, 2 ppm or 2 milligram per kilogram, up to less than that is acceptance level. Between 2 and 5 is a hazard, and it start to hurt performance. Beyond 5 is you consider a big risk there. Whether we need to have it all the time, I think it depends on a couple criteria. The first thing is the risk taken level from the producers. Apparently, if you have been doing good and getting great results, you don't have to think about that, or there was no reason for you to bring those birds to the clinic. But then when you have starting the conversation with your nutritionist, your consultant, and the vet, there's something that you need to take actions. Then yes, it needs, and especially when a dose of toxin binder, from my guess, somewhere around, let's say on average, let's say around $5 for a prevention dose, and then that $5 when the feed cost was, let's say, at around $400 per ton, compared with when feed cost went up to $600 per ton, then your investment cost became less, right? But then you get great result in the end, or limit the risk of enteritis or the treatment with medication, things like that. So there's some factor that you need to consider there. But that's great question, and I would encourage the producer, talk to your nutritionist, talk to consultant and industry people around you.
All right, we've got a few minutes left. If anyone has questions for either Kim or Dr. Teryn about this whole issue of mycotoxins, be sure to type them in and we'll pass them along. Dr. Teryn, when you think about that question about whether or not we could do a low level, anything from your perspective, you did prescribe something when you thought there was some kind of a low level, or to offset a problem. Would mycotoxin binders now be sort of your go-to for a flock if this was sort of showing up in a similar situation?
I don't think so, to be honest. There's a lot of other things we have to look at first. So when I start hearing that birds just aren't doing as well, or if there's some weird poops in the barn or something, then I usually want to perform a flock visit to get an idea of how the barn feels and how the birds look in the barn. It's not my go-to to throw in a binder right away, but it's something that's in the back of my mind, where when we check out everything else, and if management is optimal and bird health looks good when I open them up, then we'll send the feed and see what we're working with. But it's not something that I would do right away, especially with feed prices so high right now. I wouldn't want to add the cost of a binder if it wasn't necessary.
Were you surprised though at how low levels could have a big impact?
Yeah, I was surprised about that. Broilers are usually pretty tough against mycotoxins. So it's just one thing to always keep in mind.
Now, Carolyn
Can I
had
add something
asked,
there, Dia?
oh yeah, you bet, go ahead.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the presentation, Dr. Teryn mentioned that, you know, when you had that gut open, even due to, you know, the small level of mycotoxin there, then whether it depends on the water sources, the overall management, the air condition, circulation, air circulation in the winter time. But then when you have a challenge from, you know, even sub-level of mycotoxin, that is something you add on top, that, you know, a necessary condition that your bird need to deal with, and all the energy that instead of, you know, preserve for growth, then they need to use for fighting something. So, you know, from the beginning, really, you know, like when, you know, people go out and buy feed ingredient or feed in general, then they need to really care about the feed source, the quality of the ingredient that they are going to get. So,
And in addition to that too, one thing that I had to keep in mind with this case specifically is that birds that are already immune compromised, so if they have an infection or they came in and they have bursal disease, they will be more susceptible to mycotoxins as well.
Good point. Now, we do have a question that came in that said, you know, you mentioned that you would use copper sulfate to treat the birds. Can you explain that a little more? The question was.
Yeah, so copper sulfate works quite well on Clostridium perfringens, which is the bacteria that can cause necrotic enteritis in the intestines. So as we start to get enteritis, which is just inflammation of the intestines, you get a buildup of mucus, and that mucus is what the Clostridium can live off of. And the copper sulfate will reduce that mucus. It'll kind of tighten up the guts a bit so that Clostridium is less likely or more challenged to grow in the intestines. So it's just to kind of clean up the guts so that we didn't have to treat.
Right. Kim, you mentioned you looked at the crop. Are there certain weather conditions during a growing season that would probably lead to higher mycotoxin content in the feed? Is it only the growing conditions, or could it be processing and how long it's stored? Some of those other things impacting that?
For sure, you know, there are many conditions that affect to the quality of the crop. Varieties is one thing. There's some varieties that, you know, maybe can produce more yield, but then it has, you know, some aspect or the nutrient from that variety will be changed. Or, you know, you just mention, you know, the growing condition. When I show some graph about, you know, the quality of the corn between 2021 and 2020, really the challenge or the mycotoxin was not really high. Could be due to the drought condition that we are getting down south, for sure. Then that reflect even in our Canadian landmark as well, because really when I mentioned about, you know, we have crops coming from Manitoba or Table area down here, or some hotspot in Eastern Canada, then moisture content will be higher, then, you know, mycotoxin will be more prevalent in those cases, for sure.
And you mentioned that the Galleon tool. So are you kind of utilizing that? You mentioned you'd like to see sort of some trials in this area. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so it's in the pipeline now, and you know, my global team, they did great result and successful supporting our customers in Europe, in Thailand, in Vietnam. One of the successful story I can share is that, you know, with the feed price like these days, you can imagine like we are in the back wheat of the world, and, you know, people cry out for the feed price, whereas those country in Southeast Asia there, they have to import the feed ingredient, and the feed even become more expensive. And the customer thinking whether they could, you know, use a lower feed grade, compromise performance of it, whether it's possible. By using this Galleon tool, our team not only able to answer that question, but also pointing out that, oh, when you agree to compromise performance a bit, you think that, maybe you could increase your profit, but actually you open the gut of your chicken to all the bad bacteria, and in turn it may end up get into the food safety issue. And beyond that, they were able to testing out, different additives that help with that situation to improve or to make sure that, the food is safe when it comes to the table. So that was one of the good example that we got from this tool here.
Yeah, so you think you're saving yourself and you could end up costing yourself in the long run.
Yeah.
Teryn, just before we go, any other learnings from this particular case study that would be good to pass along?
I think if you feel like something is up, probably just open the birds yourself, take a look and see what you find, or bring them into a vet. Gut health can be pretty kind of like, I guess, the silent killer, like, right? Like you can be losing your profits in the guts without knowing it because your birds aren't dying. So just staying on top of bird health and bird management and feed management.